let's come back to Nigeria, launching a new national industrial policy document aimed at raising the country's industrialization ranking from the present 8th position. South Africa, Morocco, Egypt and Tunisia are Africa's leading industrial economies. Now, the industrial policy unveiled by Nigeria on Tuesday was the first bold move to address the country's industrialization question since the Tinubu's administration came into office nearly 3 years ago. Now, drilling down into the new industrial policy for me is Professor Franklin Ngwu. He is the director in charge of sustainability at the Lagos Business School. Thank you so much. We thank you for coming on the program tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you. It's good to have you here. So let's move to this industrial policy, and I want you to give me your first word, as it were, on this particular policy document.
I think it's a good document. I mean, it's an eight-page. I think it has about 8 chapters.
88 pages.
8 pages,
yeah,
yes.
90 pages.
With details of what they are supposed to do with regards to specific sectors, which they call focus sectors. So it's good. It's a good document. However, of course, this is not the first time we're having an industrial policy. Let me in 2014, during Jonathan's regime, we had the National Industrial Revolution Plan. And also during Buhari's regime, we had the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan. So, and of course, people normally say that in Nigeria, that the issue is not about the document. It's not really about formulation. It's not really about having policies. The challenge most of the time is on execution. And if you also remember, during Obasanjo's regime, we had the NEETs, that's the National Economic Empowerment Program, and also it's the seats that goes to the states as well. So the question then this time around is, what will be the difference between what we have now and what we did before with regards to the main issue is how do we execute implementation?
So since we returned to democracy in 1999, we've had roughly 4 industrial policy, economic rejuvenation program that want to speak to industrialization. So do you think the latest document really identifies the structural issues that Nigeria needs to fix in order to achieve rapid industrialization? I'm sure you heard Aliko Dangote there says, look, we need to have just at least 2-3 days behind closed doors, drill down just on energy alone. Do you agree with Aliko?
Totally agree with him. But of course, energy is not the only issue. Energy, for you to produce, for you to do anything, you need electricity. That's what Aliko is saying, and it's very important. So my own assessment is that even though he said 2 days for energy sector, which is very, very important, I think that this document now requires maybe an execution plan. Because this is just a formulated structural issue. And so, for instance,
what structural issues need to be fixed?
So I'll give you one example is the electricity that Aliko Dangote mentioned, and other energy related requirement. So another issue, for instance, is that Nigeria has maybe 2 or 3 functional seaports. So we say Apapa, Tinkan, and maybe, but of course, if you look at it, Egypt has over 40-something seaports. Morocco has about over 10 seaports. Just 2 African countries. So if we are aiming to be a leading, moving from where we are
8th position under the United Nations Africa Industrialization.
So it means, and even if you look at the target of the government in terms of we want to have a $1 trillion economy, and we are growing at about 4% or 4-point-something%, and it means that we need something different than what we are today. So a typical example is to look at also, for you to do anything, the trade policy needs to be clear. And of course, industrialization brings a lot of sectors together. Trade, finance, infrastructure, investment, skills, innovation, and all that. So, and each of these key areas, there is a serious bottleneck. So with just about 3 functional seaports, it will not work. So if you look at Lagos has about 2, we're looking at about 3. Then the Lekki Deep Seaport, there's a Badagry is coming up. But we're talking about a country of 200-something million people. So the question then is, okay, if you look at Northeast, North Central, Southeast, South, where should you have another seaport that will complement this industrialization? The answer should be maybe in Akwa Ibom. So the question then is, how do we get Calabar Port or Akwa Ibom Port to be on and functioning? And also, my thinking that the another bottleneck that needs to be looked at is there seems to be a kind of centralization of all the issues at the federal. I have not seen that clear engagement with the subnationals to say, okay, for South-South, we know you are good in oil and gas, that will enable us to achieve what we want to achieve. Not central, what will we call and say you're good in? Maybe agriculture, maybe Southeast, what will you be good? Southwest. So there also needs to be a rethinking of all these issues to now say, okay, when we start implementing, there has to be a kind of connection or connectedness of the different segments of the economy, different regions of the economy, to be able to truly lift the country
So technically, break it down, then knock it together, then put it all back together.
Not really knocking it down completely, but
well, break it down. When you
yes.
talk about Northeast, North Central, South-South, Southeast,
yes.
Southwest.
Yes.
So you give everybody something to do.
Then
you put it all together like China did.
Exactly.
And say this is what China is producing,
yes.
whether it's from Guangzhou region or whatever region.
Yes.
So that's what I mean by break it down,
And
then couple it together and say this is Nigeria's industrialization policy. You talk about special economic zones. What about that, for example? I'm sure Egypt has several. Morocco has.
Yes. No, special economic zones.
South Africa also.
Yes, it's very good and it's very important. And in the document, there are also suggestions to have special economic zones where maybe power, water, different key sectors will be provided. But is it enough? My own assessment is that we've had special economic zones before. And the question then is how quickly and how can we effectively deploy all the necessary infrastructures that will enable these special economic zones to function? But I remember also that this is federal government. We've not seen that engagement, that commitment, that connection between the federal government and the states. So now it's been launched in Abuja. What are they doing, for example, in Ilorin? What are they doing in Kano? What are they doing in Enugu? What are they doing in Bayelsa? To be able to complement what they've done in Abuja, to be able to now lift the country truly up to achieve what we want to achieve. So there is, as I said, it's a good document. I'm not doubting whether it's a good document. But there also need to be further drilling down to ensure that the areas or the focus sectors that we want to pursue are properly coordinated from federal, state, and local government.
The private sector will be very key, and it was good we mentioned that Ikuta and Gote, but there are also others that attended, big names that attended, there was NASIMA, there was Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, the Chambers of Commerce and others. Do you think the new industrial policy is not the first of such, as you said? So we talk about the needs, the seeds, the PREIGP, as well as the one under a former Minister of Trade, Industry and Aganga, as well. So do you think this is not really different, or is it new? And the private sector would have to drive this. That was part of what we heard on Tuesday.
No, the private sector, I mean, you cannot drive an industrial policy without the private sector. If you remember what happened, the Chaibors, where you have specific people in South Korea, in terms of maybe what we are seeing now as different television products and all that, they've gone into different. So we can actually say that, for example, Aliko Dangote is one of the leading industrialists or businessmen in Nigeria. So we need maybe 50 Aliko in Nigeria.
The likes of
Rabiu, different. So, but the question is, maybe we can call the private sector and say the big ones or even the emerging ones and say, what are the key issues that you need that will support you to be among to be listed like Samsung, to be listed like Toshiba, to be listed to be on that level. So that we know and say, okay. And then secondly is to say, what can we give to Africa as a continent? And then what can we give to outside Africa? Because if you look at intra-African trade, it's still very low. Even if you look at inter-African trade, it's also very low. We are contributing just about 3% to the global trade. That is Africa as a whole. Then the question then is, Nigeria is the giant of Africa. What can we contribute higher than what we are doing? So that's why I'm saying that we also need to have a proper trade policy that will align with AFTA, that is the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which will now link up to our industrial policy, and then other areas that will be used to jumpstart the economy. But the private sector, are they important? Are they necessary? Oh, they are more or less the fulcrum upon which most of these things will depend. But what the government is supposed to do is to provide the good environment, business environment, that will enable the private sector to now thrive. they will be able to get funds, they will be able to get engagement, they will be able to bring in investments from other parts of the Nigeria. But where the policy and environment are provided, then the private sector can really...
So we've got a policy on paper, 88-page document.
Yes.
Now, we're going to hand that over to the private sector, right, and say, well, here's the policy, go make it work, right. So how does that work?
It's not just about giving the private sector a document and say, go make it work. Because remember that the government, federal, state, and local, they are also very important, and they have monopoly of certain things.
Land, for example.
Regulation. For example, land, for example. And of course, if you look at the exclusive lists of the federal government, which only the federal government can implement, it means that the private sector cannot do anything without proper engagement with the federal government.
Should the federal government take a few items off that list?
I have significantly advocated that the federal government seems to be taking too much. And interestingly, I read an article that I think a senator is promoting that the revenue sharing formula needs to be re-examined in terms of calling for more resources to go to the center, that is federal government, which I think is not a valid argument. So I have advocated on so many occasions that the federal government is controlling too much, because they need to let go. Just provide the necessary environment, regulation, and all that, and allow the states and the federal and the private sector, local government to run things.
So this is what part of the government is saying. Look, we're trying to go and say, look, one industrial product per local government, as it were. So we look about these sectors which are contained in this new document: automotive, pharmaceutical, agribusiness, fishery, ICT, oil and gas. We've been for so many decades and all of that. Do you think these sectors can serve as game changers, as it were, if we want to move from the 8th position in Africa to where South Africa, Morocco, doing aviation, aerodynamics, shipbuilding, what you call the heavy liftings, as it were? Or we're still just trying to go around the basics, as it were?
I was in a workshop and they were asking, we have first industrial revolution, second industrial revolution, third industrial revolution, fourth. Some people are even talking about the fifth now, currently. And there was a consensus that we're still in the first industrial revolution. So that means we are still in terms of raw material, moving it to infancy. So even though the document talks about key sectors, some focus sectors, is it very ambitious? It's not too ambitious, but given where we are, is a starting point in terms of using these focus sectors to move us to move away from this first industrial revolution and maybe be in the second. And when we are now in the second, we can now say, okay, we need to leapfrog maybe to a very much higher level. But can we do better? Yes, we can do better in different areas. Is it in agriculture? Is it in manufacturing? Manufacturing contributes just about 9% to the GDP. The same thing, agriculture contributes about less than 20%. So the question is, can we move them forward? I was in a workshop, I think 2 days ago. Somebody was suggesting that we are talking about unemployment. And he said that Nigeria, we have about 40-something million MSMEs, that is medium and small-scale enterprises. And he is saying that why don't we call them into a room and say, what do you need to create one job? Just each of you. And that means that if we're able to provide them with what they need to just create one job, that we might end up creating about 40-something million jobs just by engaging the MSMEs.
Yes.
So the question then is that if we're able to complement what they're trying to do in these focus sectors and bring in the MSMEs, bring in that which is private sector, and say, how do we support you to achieve what we want to achieve? At least we move from that where we are now to a higher level. And of course, the more you create jobs, poverty goes down, consumption increases, demand increases, and of course, it has a kind of cyclic effect on the economy, and the economy will just start picking up. And we can now, as I said before, leapfrog to a higher level of industrialization.
So we've got an 88-page document, well launched, well attended. What should be the next line of action?
The next line of action for me is this implementation and execution. I read somewhere where they say that there's supposed to be a kind of coordinating committee chaired
for this new industrial policy,
chaired by the minister. My suggestion would be that it's good, But I would have suggested that it's chaired by the president. Because the president said that it has to be assessed based on jobs created, companies that open, and revenue generated, export that we achieve. And there has to be a KPIs following this.
Yes.
So my suggestion is that this committee has to be chaired by the president to give it the seriousness it deserves. So that
but it can be that seriousness because now you've got to take this document to the MSMEs,
yes.
to the ALICOs,
yes.
to the rest of the big... Look, the Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment is the one in charge of this. So why wouldn't she drive it?
No, you know, of course, in power dynamics, power dynamics, sometimes when you hear that the chairman of this committee is the president. So during presentations, during discussions, he can give immediate approval.
Express approval.
Express approval. Do this, do this, do this, do this. Before we come next meeting, I want X, Y, Z to have been achieved and all that. But if he's a minister, the minister will take the notes, do his report, send it to the president, start waiting for approval. Before you know it, some weeks, some months will have gone. But if he's the president, that's why he's called the president, commander-in-chief of the so he has the powers to do so many things.
Yes. Can we get the ministers to become more empowered to get things done?
Of course, you know, they are the appointees of the president. So it's at his behest to decide on who becomes more powerful or who becomes more effective.
If you need to empower some ministers to hit the ground running faster, and then we can make it now because the minister is the one who sits and listens to the man on the street, the industrialist, the one who goes to the factory floor, the one who sees it. Mr. President doesn't see much of that, if at all.
Yes, but he can engage. But what I'm trying to say is the signaling effect. So imagine when you say that the president is the chairman of this committee, the minister is the vice chairman, as the case may be, and you now have other relevant ministers and private sector people. So it means that, and they meet regularly. It means that the president does not need to read in too many reports because he's hearing it direct from the relevant agencies, and things can actually work. Because what we are saying that this industrial policy is too important for Nigeria.
Yes.
To move us forward, to create jobs, to revenue generation, poverty reduction, export, and so it's more or less at the center of our governance and our economy.
To implement this, we'll need not just the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment. We'll require several agencies.
Yes.
Do you see where do you see the coordination here for this implementation before everyone starts wanting to look good before Mr. President, like you said?
Yes.
And then we end up getting virtually nothing done at the end of the day. We've been here before.
Yes, that's exactly why I'm suggesting, because if you look at this, the policy, it will require high level of stakeholders engagement in terms of Ministry of Finance, Works, Power, Agriculture,
and the ministers across
Transport, and across these sectors.
Yes, that's
and then the private sectors. And then maybe other associations.
Are we going to end up having so much a jumbo, I'm trying to find it right. I'm trying to be very careful with. Kind of a jumbo meetings at the end of the day. Everybody goes to Abuja to have meetings with Mr. President.
And that's what I'm saying.
Some nice lunch, dinner, breakfast. At the end of the day, it all ends up on paper.
And that's why I'm saying that when the president is the chairman of the committee, he can actually engage. He can actually engage the governors and say, what we've done in Abuja, please, we want you to replicate an aspect of it in your states based on the discussion and alignment. To say, Kwara, you are good in this, please, this has to be aligned to the national one. Enugu, you are this. Kano, you are going to do this. Borno, you are going to do this. Adamawa, you are going to do this. So during meetings, all this, even the governors and the private sector leaders in the different states can actually participate. I am looking at how do we make it to be more effective. Because if you are a minister and I'm a minister and I'm pursuing my own priorities, and you are pursuing your own priorities, your priorities are not might not really be exactly my own priority. So, but when you have a proper coordination, pursuing execution, you find out that things can be better. Because we cannot continue, as you said, we've been through this process
we've traveled this route before.
So what I'm trying to say is that there needs to be a different way of doing things by the president leading this charge and now also calling the governors and saying, do this, do this. If a president calls a governor, the governor will act immediately. But if a minister calls a governor, he might act or he might not act. And there's nothing you can do about it. But you can't really just ignore a president and say, you will not do it.
Do you think there's anything, just to summarize this conversation, very interesting with you, in terms of what we can learn from South Africa, Morocco, Tunisia, and others, in terms of how they quickly, Egypt, and also in terms of quickly executing industrial policy such that they become industrial leaders of Africa, whereas Nigeria has got far more resources, as it were, than some of these countries, with due respect to everyone?
I think, let's even look at Ghana. Ghana has, I think they had this policy of one district, one industry, or one company, or something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah. So the main issue in Nigeria, which I'm saying that the president should actually be in charge, is power. Electricity.
So we go back to what Aliko said.
No, I agree. And then issue of other infrastructure and security. So,
by the way, a Nigerian was just appointed by the president of Botswana.
Botswana, yes.
A Nigerian.
Yes. So we cannot be talking about...
Maybe we need something different.
We cannot be talking about
power.
grid failure, national... This every time is failing and failing. Power is just fluctuating between 4,000, 5,000, 6,000. And we're talking about industrialization.
Yeah, because wherever you're going to have these meetings for this industrialization policy, you need power.
So there has to be a kind of declare a national emergency in power and say anything that can be done to improve power generation. Well, if it requires decentralization, if it requires regionalization, anything that will be required.
Or break down the Ministry of Power.
Even if it means looking at generation, transmission, generation, transmission and distribution, and say what can be done differently to ensure that we have higher generation, better transmission, and better distribution. I mean, look at what some geometric is doing in Abe area and all that, and say, how can we replicate this in other areas? How can we use gas to power? So I am saying and repeating again that this requires a presidential commitment and ownership for it to move forward.
Makes sense. I guess we're going to come back to this conversation on power because it's still the elephant in the room.
Exactly.
I agree. It's good to be here with you. On the show, first time in the new year. Thank you. Wish you all the best. Thank you for making the time. For those perspectives, Nigerian industrial policy, I have a great team, Professor Franklin Ngwu of the Lagos Business School.